Elena was 28 years old and broke when the email arrived. A paleontology research team needed an illustrator for their summer expedition in the Canadian Rockies. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady work, and she'd been living off instant noodles for 3 months straight. Her art degree had promised a creative career, but reality had given her freelance gigs that barely covered rent in her tiny Vancouver apartment. She replied to the email within minutes, packed her supplies that same night, and drove into the mountains the next morning. The Burgess Shale fossil site sat high in the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by peaks that still held snow even in June. The research camp consisted of a few weather-beaten tents, a makeshift lab under a tarp, and a team of 7 scientists who looked at her like she was an inconvenience they'd been forced to accommodate. Dr. Chen, the lead researcher, was polite but distant. He showed her to her tent, gave her a brief overview of what they were studying, and handed her a box of fossil samples to sketch. "We need accurate scientific illustrations," he explained, adjusting his glasses. "Just document what you see. Shape, texture, size. Nothing fancy. Think of yourself as a camera, not an artist." Elena nodded and promised to deliver exactly what they needed. She'd heard this speech before from other scientists who viewed art as decoration rather than discovery. That first week, she drew fossils exactly as requested. Precise measurements, clear details, professional work that satisfied the team's need for documentation. But she was bored out of her mind. These weren't just rocks to her. They were creatures that had lived, breathed, hunted, and died in an ocean so ancient that no human words could properly describe its age. 508 million years ago, before fish, before plants on land, before anything that looked remotely familiar. The breakthrough happened on a Thursday afternoon. Dr. Chen brought her a particularly well-preserved trilobite fossil and asked her to sketch it for an upcoming paper. Elena held the stone in her hands, feeling its weight and texture. She stared at the imprint of the creature's segmented body, its compound eyes, its delicate legs frozen in time. And then something shifted. She didn't decide to paint differently. Her hand just moved on its own. Instead of a technical drawing, she created something else entirely. The trilobite wasn't dead anymore in her painting. It was alive, swimming through turquoise water, its legs propelling it across a seafloor covered in strange cup-shaped creatures and primitive sponges. Light filtered down from above, creating rippling patterns. In the background, a massive Anomalocaris prowled, its compound eyes searching for prey. Elena painted for 3 hours straight, completely absorbed, barely breathing. When she finally looked up, Dr. Chen was standing behind her, staring at the painting in silence. She tensed, expecting criticism. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I know you wanted something simple. I can redo it properly." But he didn't respond. He just kept staring at the painting, his expression unreadable. "Where did you learn about Anomalocaris predation patterns?" he finally asked. Elena blinked in confusion. "I don't know what that is," she admitted. He pointed at the large creature in her painting. "This Anomalocaris, the apex predator of the Cambrian period. We've been studying its hunting behavior based on fossil evidence. The way you painted it, the position in the water column, the proximity to trilobite habitats, it's all accurate. How did you know?" She looked at her own painting, genuinely surprised. "I didn't know. I just painted what I saw when I held the fossil." Dr. Chen pulled out his phone and showed her recent research papers his team had been working on. Everything in her painting matched their findings. Details she couldn't have possibly known because the research hadn't been published yet. That night, the entire team gathered in the main tent to look at her work. Some were skeptical, suggesting she'd somehow seen their research notes. Others were intrigued, asking her to try painting other fossils. Dr. Chen remained quiet, studying her painting with intense focus. Finally, he spoke. "Do it again, with a different specimen. I want to see if this was coincidence or something else." Elena spent the next week in a strange new routine. Each morning, Dr. Chen would give her a fossil. She'd hold it, close her eyes, and let images form in her mind. Then she'd paint what she saw. Ancient seafloors teeming with bizarre life. Predators and prey locked in eternal chase. Ecosystems that functioned by rules we were only beginning to understand. And every single painting proved accurate when compared to the latest research data. The scientists stopped treating her like a camera and started treating her like a colleague. They'd bring her fossils and ask what she saw. Her paintings helped them understand ecological relationships they'd only theorized about. She could visualize how creatures moved, what they ate, where they lived in the water column. It was like she had access to a documentary from 500 million years ago that only she could see. But the work began to change her in ways she didn't initially understand. She started having vivid dreams about ancient oceans. She'd wake up feeling like she'd been underwater for hours, her lungs aching for air that wasn't there. The dreams were so realistic that she sometimes struggled to remember which era she was living in. She'd stumble out of her tent at dawn, disoriented, half expecting to see Cambrian seas instead of Canadian mountains. Dr. Chen noticed her growing obsession. "You're working too hard," he said one evening, finding her painting by flashlight long after everyone else had gone to sleep. "You need to rest," but Elena shook her head. "I can't stop now. There's so much more to see. 500 million years of life, of death, of worlds that existed and vanished. I'm just starting to understand it." She began researching mass extinctions on her own, using the camp's satellite internet connection late at night. She learned about the 5 major catastrophes that had nearly wiped out all life on Earth. The Ordovician extinction, the Devonian extinction, the Permian extinction, the worst of all, the Triassic extinction, the Cretaceous extinction that killed the dinosaurs. Each one was a complete reshaping of life on Earth. Each one left behind only fossils and questions. The team expanded their project to include these extinction events. They wanted Elena to paint what these dying worlds looked like. She agreed immediately, hungry for the challenge. Dr. Chen gave her fossils from the Ordovician period, right before a massive glaciation event killed off 85% of all species. Elena held a fossil coral and saw tropical reefs dying as ice expanded across the planet. She painted warm, shallow seas freezing over, creatures struggling in water that grew colder each day until nothing could survive. The painting disturbed everyone who saw it. It wasn't just scientifically accurate. It was emotionally devastating. You could feel the cold radiating from the canvas. You could sense the desperation of life clinging to existence as its world transformed into something hostile. One of the younger researchers actually cried when she saw it. "It's like watching everything die," she whispered. Elena painted 4 more extinction events that summer. Each one was more intense than the last. The Devonian extinction with its oxygen-starved oceans, the Permian extinction with its volcanic hellscape and superheated atmosphere, the Triassic extinction with its rapid climate swings, the Cretaceous extinction with its asteroid impact and global firestorms. She documented 5 different ways that life on Earth had nearly ended. 5 different apocalypses separated by millions of years. By August, she'd created a visual archive of death unlike anything that existed in paleontology. Museums were calling Dr. Chen asking to display her work. Academic journals wanted to publish her paintings alongside research papers. But Elena barely noticed the attention. She was consumed by a realization that terrified her more than any ancient extinction. She'd started seeing patterns in how these worlds died. Temperature changes, atmospheric shifts, ocean chemistry alterations. Each extinction had its own signature, its own sequence of environmental collapse, and those patterns looked disturbingly familiar. They looked like graphs and data she'd seen before, not from ancient history but from the present day. From climate reports about modern Earth. Elena spread her paintings across the floor of her tent one night, arranging them chronologically. 5 extinct worlds, 5 different catastrophes. She pulled up current climate data on her laptop and placed printouts next to her paintings. The similarities made her hands tremble. Rising temperatures, changing ocean acidity, atmospheric carbon increasing too rapidly for life to adapt. Earth had done this before, 5 times before, and it was doing it again right now, with humans watching it happen in slow motion. Dr. Chen found her like that at 3 in the morning, surrounded by paintings and data, her face illuminated by laptop glow. "Elena, you should sleep," he said gently. She looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "We're in the 6th extinction," she said quietly. "It's happening right now. We're living through it. We just can't see it because we're measuring time in human lifetimes instead of geological epochs." He tried to reassure her, tried to explain that modern extinctions were different, that humans could still change course. But Elena had seen 5 dead worlds that summer. She'd painted their last moments over and over. She knew how extinctions worked. They didn't announce themselves. They crept up slowly, shifting the... Elena didn't return to Vancouver after the summer expedition ended. Instead, she followed Dr. Chen's research team to South Africa in November. They were heading to the Karoo Basin to study the Permian extinction, and she'd convinced them she needed to be there. This wasn't just another mass extinction to document. This was the Great Dying, the worst catastrophe in Earth's history. 252 million years ago, 96% of all species vanished in less than 200,000 years. In geological terms, that was instantaneous, a blink, a moment when the planet nearly became completely sterile. The Karoo Basin stretched across South Africa like a monument to death. Endless rocky hills holding layers of sediment that recorded the moment when the world ended. Dr. Chen's team had secured permits to excavate specific sites where the extinction boundary was particularly clear. You could literally see it in the rock layers. Below the line, fossils everywhere. Above the line, almost nothing. Just a few hardy survivors in a dead landscape. Elena set up her workspace in a small cottage outside the town of Graaff-Reinet. The place was basic, just a bedroom, a bathroom, and a large main room with good natural light. She covered the walls with maps and photographs of fossil sites. She hung timeline charts showing what lived before the extinction and what survived after. This was going to be her home for the next 6 months, her base for understanding the worst thing that had ever happened to life on Earth. The first month was spent just absorbing information. She visited excavation sites daily, watching the team carefully extract fossils from rocks that were older than anything her mind could properly comprehend. Dr. Chen would explain what they were finding, strange proto-mammal creatures called therapsids that looked like crosses between reptiles and mammals, giant amphibians, primitive reptiles, insects with wingspans as long as her arm, and plants, endless varieties of seed ferns and conifers that had covered the land before everything burned. Elena started painting the Permian world as it was before the extinction. Lush forests under a sun that was slightly dimmer than today's. Therapsids hunting in packs like wolves. Massive herbivores grazing on ferns. Rivers full of armored fish and giant amphibians. It was a successful, thriving world, millions of years into its own evolution. Nothing about it suggested that catastrophe was coming. That's what disturbed her most. The Permian ecosystem had no warning. It was thriving one geological moment and dying the next. But Elena wanted to understand how it died, not just that it died. She began developing a new painting technique that she'd experimented with briefly in Canada but never fully explored. She started painting on transparent sheets, creating layers of the same landscape at different points in time. The first layer showed the thriving Permian ecosystem. The second layer, painted over the first, showed the same location but slightly changed. Plants beginning to struggle, animals looking thinner. The third layer showed more death. The fourth showed a wasteland. When you looked through all the layers at once, you could see the progression of extinction, like watching a slow-motion collapse. Dr. Chen was fascinated by this technique. "It's like you're creating a visual timeline," he said, examining her layered paintings against the light. "We can see the data in numbers and charts, but this shows it in a way that makes sense emotionally. You can feel how the world died." Elena nodded, but she was thinking about something else. She was thinking about how this technique could be used to show more than just the Permian extinction. The research team had collected extensive data about what caused the Great Dying. Wasn't an asteroid like the one that killed the dinosaurs. It was volcanism on a scale that modern humans had never witnessed. The Siberian Traps, a volcanic event so massive it lasted for 2 million years and covered an area larger than Europe with lava. The volcanoes pumped carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere faster than the planet could absorb it. Temperatures spiked. Oceans became acidic and oxygen depleted. The ozone layer was damaged. It was a cascade of environmental catastrophes that fed into each other until the entire planet became hostile to most forms of life. Elena painted these mechanisms with scientific precision. She showed volcanic fields stretching to the horizon. She painted skies thick with ash. She illustrated ocean chemistry changes with color gradients that shifted from healthy blue to toxic purple. But as she worked, she kept thinking about the modern climate data she'd compared to extinction patterns back in Canada. The similarities weren't going away. They were getting stronger in her mind. One evening, she spread all her Permian paintings across the cottage floor and pulled up her laptop. She started comparing what killed the Permian world to what was happening in the modern world. Volcanic carbon dioxide versus industrial carbon dioxide. Permian temperature spikes versus modern temperature increases. Ocean acidification then versus ocean acidification now. The mechanisms were different, but the patterns were the same. Rising carbon, rising heat, dying oceans, life struggling to adapt to change happening too fast. She created a new series of transparent layer paintings, but these weren't about the Permian anymore. The first layer showed modern coral reefs, healthy and full of life. The second layer showed the same reefs bleached white. The third showed them dead and crumbling. The fourth showed empty ocean floor where nothing grew. When you looked through all four layers, you watched a modern ecosystem die in exactly the same way Permian reefs had died 252 million years ago. Dr. Chen found her working on these modern comparisons late one night. He'd stopped by to drop off some new fossil data and found her surrounded by paintings that had nothing to do with ancient extinctions. "Elena, what is this?" he asked, confused. She held up two paintings side by side. One showed a Permian reef dying from temperature stress and acidification. The other showed a modern coral reef dying from the exact same causes. "It's the same pattern," she said quietly. "Different mechanisms, but the same result. We're recreating the Permian extinction, just with factories instead of volcanoes." He sat down on the floor next to her, looking at the paintings in silence. Finally, he spoke carefully. "The situations aren't identical. We have the capacity to change our behavior in ways that ancient life couldn't. Volcanoes don't stop because ecosystems are suffering. Humans can choose differently." Elena appreciated his optimism, but she'd spent months studying how extinctions actually worked. "Can we choose differently fast enough?" The Permian extinction happened over 100,000 years. That sounds like a long time, but it wasn't. Life couldn't adapt that quickly, and we're changing the planet faster than the Siberian traps did. Much faster. That conversation changed the direction of her work. She stopped being just a paleontological illustrator and became something else. Someone trying to use ancient extinctions as a warning about modern ones. She continued painting the Permian world for Dr. Chen's research, but she also started creating comparative works that placed ancient and modern extinctions side by side. She painted Ordovician glaciation next to melting polar ice caps. She painted Devonian ocean anoxia next to modern dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico. She painted the Permian temperature spike next to graphs showing current global temperature increases. Each painting was meticulously researched and scientifically accurate, but they were also profoundly disturbing. They showed that Earth had done this before, and they showed that we were making it do it again. Dr. Chen supported her work even though it made him uncomfortable. "You're not wrong about the patterns," he admitted. "But I worry about what this is doing to you. You're becoming obsessed. You barely sleep. You barely eat. All you do is paint extinctions." Elena understood his concern, but she couldn't stop. Every day she spent studying the Permian extinction, she saw more connections to the present. Every fossil she examined was a warning from the past that nobody seemed to be hearing. The research team started noticing changes in her behavior that went beyond obsession. She'd be examining a fossil and suddenly seem to drift away, staring at nothing. She'd be painting and start crying without explanation. She had nightmares that left her shaking and confused. One morning, Dr. Chen found her standing outside at dawn, looking at the horizon with a strange expression. "I can smell the sulfur," she said quietly. "From the volcanoes. I can feel the heat." He gently reminded her that there were no active volcanoes nearby, that what she was experiencing was stress and exhaustion, not reality. But Elena wasn't sure anymore what was real and what was memory or imagination. The Permian world felt more vivid to her every day. When she held fossils, she didn't just see images in her mind, she experienced them. She felt the temperature of the water, tasted the ash in the air, heard the sounds of a dying world. It was like her mind was accessing something beyond normal perception, touching the actual past instead of just imagining it. She started having insights that she couldn't explain rationally. She'd predict where the team would find certain fossils based on feelings rather than geological reasoning. She'd describe species that hadn't been documented yet and be proven right when new discoveries were made. She painted a scene showing therapsids migrating toward the poles as equatorial regions became too hot. And 3 weeks later, Dr. Chen's. The studio apartment in Cape Town was small, just one room with a bathroom and a tiny kitchen alcove. But it had what Elena needed. Good light, white walls, and rent she could afford for exactly 6 months before her savings ran out. She moved in with nothing but her art supplies, a sleeping bag, and a laptop. No furniture, no decorations, no distractions. This wasn't a home. It was a workspace for the most important project of her life. The first week, she just planned. She covered one wall with timeline charts showing all 5 major mass extinctions across Earth's history. The Ordovician extinction 445 million years ago. The Devonian extinction 375 million years ago. The Permian extinction 252 million years ago. The Triassic extinction 200 million years ago. The Cretaceous extinction 66 million years ago. 5 times when life on Earth nearly ended. 5 different causes, but similar patterns in how the catastrophes unfolded. On the opposite wall, she pinned modern environmental data. Temperature graphs showing the rapid warming since industrialization. Ocean acidity measurements over the past century. Carbon dioxide levels climbing past anything seen in millions of years. Species extinction rates accelerating exponentially. Coral reef death maps. Glacier retreat photographs. Deforestation statistics. Every piece of data she could find about the current state of Earth's ecosystems. Between these 2 walls, she placed her empty canvases. This was where the comparison would happen. This was where ancient and modern would meet in images that nobody could ignore. She called the project her Anthropocene Atlas, named after the proposed geological epoch defined by human impact on the planet. But really, it was an atlas of extinction, a map showing that the 6th mass dying wasn't approaching in some distant future. It was happening right now, unfolding too slowly for human perception to register it as the emergency it was. Elena started painting at dawn and worked until she couldn't see straight anymore. No breaks, no social life, no distractions. Her first painting showed an Ordovician reef before and during the extinction. The before image was alive with primitive corals and early fish. The during image showed the same reef frozen under expanding glacial ice, everything dead from sudden climate change. Next to this ancient scene, she painted a modern Arctic coral reef and then the same reef bleached white from warming water temperatures. Different mechanism, same result. Life unable to adapt to change happening too fast. She moved through all 5 extinctions this way, creating pairs of paintings that placed ancient catastrophes next to modern ones. Devonian oceans starved of oxygen next to modern dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico and Baltic Sea. Permian volcanic carbon dioxide next to industrial carbon emissions. Triassic climate instability next to modern extreme weather patterns. Cretaceous asteroid impact next to current habitat destruction that was having similarly devastating effects on species survival. The paintings were technically brilliant, but emotionally devastating. You couldn't look at them without feeling the weight of what they showed. Elena wasn't trying to be subtle. She wanted people to understand that mass extinctions weren't abstract events from Earth's distant past. They were patterns that repeated, and humans had triggered the 6th repetition. We were the asteroid this time. We were the volcanoes. We were the catastrophe. By the end of the 2nd month, every wall in the apartment was covered. The floor, too. She'd created over 40 large paintings and dozens of smaller studies. The space had transformed into an immersive environment where you couldn't escape the message. Past and present extinctions surrounded you, showing the same patterns repeating across hundreds of millions of years. Elena lived in this space, sleeping on the floor between paintings, eating simple meals while staring at dying worlds. Dr. Chen called regularly, worried about her. She'd stopped responding to most messages, but she'd answer his calls occasionally. "How's the work going?" he'd ask gently. "It's done," she told him one evening in late March. "I need to show it to people. Not in a journal, not in a museum that charges admission. I need to show it where people are, where they can't avoid seeing it." He tried to suggest proper venues, academic conferences, natural history museums, but Elena was past caring about proper channels. Proper channels were too slow. The world was dying in real time while academic papers went through peer review. She started guerrilla exhibiting her work. She'd arrive at a public square early in the morning with paintings rolled up in tubes. She'd set them up against walls, lean them on benches, arrange them so pedestrians walking to work couldn't avoid seeing them. She'd stand nearby with simple handmade signs explaining what the paintings showed. Most people hurried past, but some stopped. Some stared, some took photos, some cried. The Cape Town city government told her she needed permits. She'd pack up and move to a different location. University students invited her to exhibit on campus. She'd set up in courtyards between classes. watching young people's faces change as they understood what they were seeing. Some got angry, thinking she was exaggerating. Others thanked her for showing what they'd felt but couldn't articulate. The knowledge that something fundamental was breaking in the world and nobody seemed to know how to fix it. Elena photographed all her paintings and created a website. She uploaded everything with detailed explanations of both the ancient extinctions and the modern data. She included scientific sources for people who wanted to verify her claims. The website went viral within a week. Suddenly, hundreds of thousands of people were seeing her work. Then millions. Environmental organizations shared it. Climate scientists shared it. Teachers used it in classrooms. But also climate change deniers attacked it, calling her alarmist and saying she was misleading people by comparing natural extinctions to modern conditions. The controversy didn't bother Elena. She'd studied 5 mass extinctions in detail. She knew what catastrophic environmental change looked like. She knew the patterns, and she knew that every species that went extinct did so thinking their world was permanent, that the conditions they'd evolved for would continue. None of them saw the extinction coming until it was too late. Humans weren't special. We were just another species witnessing our world change faster than we could adapt. But the attention brought something unexpected. Dr. Chen called one evening, his voice excited. "Elena, I've been contacted by 3 major museums who want to exhibit your work. Properly, I mean. With educational programming, guided tours, the whole thing. This could reach millions more people." Elena felt torn. Part of her wanted her work in prestigious institutions where it would be preserved and studied. But another part worried that museums would sanitize the message, make it academic and distant instead of immediate and urgent. She decided to do one major exhibition, but only on her terms. She found an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district of Cape Town. The building was huge, with 5 separate rooms connected by narrow hallways. The owner was about to tear it down, but gave her 3 months to use it for free if she agreed to leave it exactly as she found it. Elena accepted immediately. This was perfect. 5 rooms for 5 extinctions, and a 6th room for what was happening now. She spent 2 weeks transforming the warehouse into an immersive experience. Each room represented one mass extinction, with her paintings covering every surface including the ceiling and floor. You'd walk into the Ordovician room and be surrounded by freezing ice and dying reefs. The Devonian room smelled like sulfur and showed suffocating seas. The Permian room was overwhelming, paintings of volcanic hellscapes and global burning everywhere you looked. The Triassic room captured climate chaos and instability. The Cretaceous room showed the moment of asteroid impact and its aftermath. But the 6th room was different. Elena left it completely empty except for blank canvases, paint supplies, and brushes. She hung a single sign on the wall that read, "Paint what you see coming." This was the Anthropocene room, the 6th extinction, and she wanted visitors to participate in creating it, to paint their own visions of the future, whether apocalyptic or hopeful. The exhibition opened on a Saturday morning with no publicity except word of mouth and social media posts. Elena expected maybe 100 visitors the first week. Over 1,000 people showed up the first day. They walked through the extinction rooms in stunned silence. Many people cried in the Permian room. Children asked their parents questions nobody knew how to answer. And in the 6th room, people painted. Some painted disasters. Cities flooded, forests burning, animals dying. But others painted hope. Rewilded urban spaces, protected oceans, renewable energy covering deserts, people living in balance with ecosystems. Elena watched from a corner as the 6th room slowly filled with visitor paintings. It was becoming a collaborative artwork about the future, created by thousands of people grappling with extinction and possibility simultaneously. Climate scientists started holding informal talks in the warehouse. Environmental activists organized meetings there. Teachers brought entire classes. The warehouse became more than an exhibition. It became a gathering place for people processing ecological grief and trying to figure out what to do about it. Elena was there every day, mostly just watching and listening. Sometimes people would recognize her and want to talk. She'd answer their question. Elena returned to Dr. Chen's research team in September, but she knew immediately that something had changed in her. The warehouse exhibition had taken something from her, or maybe given her something, she couldn't quite tell which. She'd spent 3 months surrounded by dying worlds, breathing in the reality of extinction until it became part of her cellular memory. Now back in the field excavating fossils in Montana, she felt untethered from normal time. The team was studying the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, the thin layer of rock that marked the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. It was a fascinating sight, showing the moment when one era ended and another began. Below the boundary, dinosaur fossils everywhere. Above it, almost nothing for thousands of years. Just a few small mammals and some hardy plants struggling to survive in a world covered in ash and darkness. Elena's job was to paint reconstructions of the impact and its aftermath. She'd done this kind of work before, but now it felt different. When she held a piece of boundary clay, rich in iridium from the asteroid, her hands started shaking. She could smell burning rock, feel concussive force rippling through the air, hear a sound like the earth itself screaming. She dropped the sample and stumbled backward, gasping. Dr. Chen rushed over, concerned. "Elena, what's wrong?" She couldn't explain. How do you tell someone you just experienced an asteroid impact from 66 million years ago, as if you were standing there when it happened? She mumbled something about not feeling well and went back to her tent. But the experience wouldn't leave her. She could still smell the burning, still feel the shockwave in her bones. That night she tried to paint what she'd experienced. Her hand moved across the canvas in a frenzy, creating an image that was terrifyingly vivid. The moment of impact. A mountain-sized rock hitting shallow sea near the Yucatan Peninsula. The water vaporizing instantly, rock melting. A crater forming in seconds that would be over 100 miles wide. And then the shockwave, racing across the planet faster than sound, igniting forests, triggering earthquakes, sending tsunamis across oceans. Everything dying in moments, and the ones that survived the initial impact facing years of darkness as ash blocked the sun. When she finished, she stared at the painting in shock. She hadn't just imagined this. She'd witnessed it. The detail was impossible. She could see individual rocks ejecting from the crater, could count the layers of the atmospheric shock bubble, could trace the pattern of global firestorms. This wasn't artistic interpretation. This was documentation of an event she'd somehow accessed across millions of years. Dr. Chen saw the painting the next morning and went silent. "Elena, this is extraordinary. How did you know about the atmospheric shock patterns? We just got data about that last month from impact modeling. It hasn't been published yet." She shook her head, unable to answer. She didn't know about atmospheric shock patterns. She'd just painted what she'd seen, or experienced, or whatever was happening to her. The temporal experiences got stronger after that. She'd be examining a Triceratops fossil, and suddenly be standing in a late Cretaceous forest, watching the massive herbivore strip leaves from a tree. She'd hold a piece of fossil fern and smell the distinctive plant chemistry of ancient vegetation. She'd touch boundary clay and experience the horrifying silence that came after the impact, when the world was so quiet because almost everything with a voice was dead. The team started noticing her strange behavior. She'd be in the middle of a conversation and drift away, staring at nothing with an expression of horror or wonder. She'd cry while painting without explanation. She stopped sleeping more than a few hours a night because the dreams were too intense. She'd wake up convinced she was dying from toxic atmosphere or starving in endless volcanic winter. Dr. Chen finally insisted she see a medical professional. They drove to Billings, where a psychiatrist specializing in trauma and dissociation evaluated her. Elena tried to explain what was happening. "I'm not making this up. I'm experiencing these events as if I'm actually there. I can see, smell, hear, feel everything. It's not imagination. It's more real than this conversation we're having right now." The psychiatrist was kind but firm. "What you're describing sounds like dissociative episodes possibly triggered by intensive focus on traumatic historical events. Your mind is constructing vivid experiences from the data you've absorbed. It feels real, but it's a psychological phenomenon, not actual time travel or psychic connection to the past." She prescribed medication and recommended Elena take a leave from the project to rest and recover. Elena took the prescription, but never filled it. She knew what she was experiencing wasn't dissociation in the conventional sense. Something had unlocked in her mind during the warehouse project. Some ability to access temporal information that shouldn't be accessible. She'd spent so long immersed in extinction that her consciousness had somehow learned to move through geological time instead of being trapped in the present moment. She decided to test this ability deliberately. She sat in her tent with a carefully selected fossil, a small marine reptile from the Permian extinction. She held it gently, and instead of resisting the temporal pull, she surrendered to it. The tent disappeared. She was underwater in a dying Permian ocean. The water was warm, too warm, and it smelled wrong. Sulfuric, low oxygen. She watched as the marine reptile struggled to breathe, its movements becoming sluggish. Other creatures floated dead around her. The ocean was dying, and everything in it was suffocating. When Elena came back to herself, 2 hours had passed. Dr. Chen had been calling her name outside the tent, worried. She emerged shaking, but also strangely calm. "I was there," she told him. "In the Permian Ocean. I experienced the extinction from inside it. I know how it felt to die in those conditions." He looked at her with deep concern. "Elena, you're scaring me. You need help. This isn't healthy." But Elena felt the opposite. For the first time since her temporal experiences began, she understood what was happening. She wasn't having a breakdown. She was accessing information through a channel that science didn't recognize or understand. She could experience geological time directly instead of just studying it through fossils and data. And if she could experience the past this way, maybe she could experience potential futures too. She started deliberately inducing temporal experiences with different fossils and rocks. Each time she'd paint what she witnessed. Her paintings became even more accurate than before, showing details that researchers would confirm weeks or months later, through analysis they hadn't completed yet. She painted ecosystems, predator behaviors, climate conditions, all with precision that shouldn't have been possible. The research team was divided about what to do. Some thought Elena had developed an extraordinary gift that should be studied. Others worried she was having a prolonged mental health crisis that was being enabled rather than treated. Dr. Chen was torn between both perspectives, fascinated by her accuracy but terrified she was harming herself. Then Elena did something that changed everything. She started painting futures instead of pasts. She'd sit with modern geological samples, rocks from current environments, and let her consciousness drift forward instead of backward. The paintings she created showed Earth decades and centuries into the future, and they were deeply disturbing. She painted cities in 2100 half-submerged in risen seas, with strange hybrid ecosystems growing through the abandoned buildings. She painted 2200 when the Amazon rainforest had become savanna, and entirely new climate zones had formed. She painted 2500 with ocean chemistry that had never existed in Earth's history, and creatures that didn't exist yet, evolved to survive in conditions that would kill everything alive today. These future paintings had the same precise detail as her past paintings. She didn't paint general predictions. She painted specific landscapes with specific organisms adapted in specific ways. She painted evolutionary responses to environmental pressures that hadn't fully manifested yet. She painted the ecology of the post-Anthropocene world, after humans had either adapted radically or vanished. Dr. Chen found her one evening surrounded by these future paintings, and it broke something in him. "Elena, please stop. You're painting worlds where we've failed, where most of humanity doesn't make it. You're experiencing futures that haven't happened yet, and might not happen if we make different choices now. But you're treating them like they're inevitable." She looked at him with eyes that seemed to be seeing multiple time periods simultaneously. "I'm not treating them as inevitable. I'm showing what's coming if we follow the pattern. Every extinction I've studied had a point of no return, a moment after which the cascade couldn't be stopped. I'm trying to figure out if we've passed that point, or if there's still a chance to diverge from the pattern. And to do that, I need to see where the pattern leads." The conversation that followed was long and difficult. Dr. Chen tried to anchor her in present reality, to convince her that whatever she was experiencing wasn't literal time travel, but rather her mind creating elaborate scenarios from data she'd absorbed. Elena countered that accuracy proved otherwise. She was documenting things that were later confirmed, predicting discoveries before they happened, describing processes that scientists hadn't fully understood. Elena emerged from the Montana cabin 4 months later looking like someone who'd been to war with time itself and barely survived. She'd lost more weight. Her hair had grown wild and her eyes held a strange quality like they were focused on something just beyond normal perception. But she was coherent, functional, and carrying over 100 new paintings that Dr. Chen would later describe as the most important paleontological artwork ever created. The winter isolation had broken something in her, but it had also reconstructed her differently. She'd spent 4 months deliberately moving through geological time, experiencing extinctions from the inside, witnessing the patterns that connected them across hundreds of millions of years. She'd pushed her temporal perception to its absolute limit and discovered something that changed how she understood everything. Time didn't move linearly during extinctions. It collapsed. The slow geological processes that normally took thousands or millions of years compressed into moments of catastrophic change, and during those moments, past, present, and future existed simultaneously. The Permian extinction wasn't something that happened 252 million years ago. It was still happening, eternally frozen in that moment of collapse, accessible to anyone who knew how to look. The sixth extinction wasn't coming. It was already happening, unfolding in the same eternal now where all extinctions occurred. She called Dr. Chen from a gas station payphone on her way back to civilization. "I understand now," she told him, her voice hoarse from months of barely speaking. "I know what I need to do. I'm going to create one final installation. After that, I'll either be done with this work or it'll be done with me. Either way, this is the conclusion." Dr. Chen wanted her to rest, to recover, to process what she'd experienced in isolation. But Elena was already planning. She'd found an abandoned factory building in Detroit that was perfect. 5 connected rooms like the Cape Town warehouse, but larger, more industrial, more suited to what she was creating. The building's owner was thrilled to have someone use the space before demolition. She could have it for 6 months free, if she helped clean it out. Elena moved to Detroit in early April and began transforming the factory into what she called the Museum of Collapsed Time. But this wasn't like the Cape Town exhibition. This was something more ambitious and strange. She was creating an environment where visitors would experience temporal collapse the way she had, where the linear progression of time would break down and all 5 extinctions would exist simultaneously with the present moment. She spent 6 weeks just preparing the space, removing machinery, patching walls, installing special lighting. Then she began painting directly on the walls, floor, and ceiling of each room. The first room was Ordovision, but not just a static scene. She painted it in layers that overlapped and bled into each other, showing the extinction happening across millions of years simultaneously. You'd see thriving reefs and dead glacial expanses in the same visual field, your brain struggling to process both at once. The Devonian room showed suffocating oceans that were also teeming with life, the before and after existing together. The Permian room was overwhelming, volcanic apocalypse and lush forests occupying the same space. Time folded over itself until you couldn't tell which came first. The Triassic room captured climate chaos as a permanent state rather than a progression. The Cretaceous room showed the asteroid impact frozen mid-moment, the explosion simultaneously happening and finished and about to happen. But the 6th room, the Anthropocene room, was the most unsettling. Elena painted current landscapes with future extinctions already visible within them, healthy forests with dead trees overlapping, living coral reefs with bleached skeletons present in the same image, cities functioning normally with flooded ruins occupying the same physical space. It was the present and future collapsed together, showing that the extinction wasn't coming but was already here, just distributed across a timeline that human perception couldn't grasp all at once. She worked 18-hour days for 2 months, barely eating, painting in a trance state where she wasn't sure which time period she was occupying. Sometimes she'd step back and not recognize what she'd painted, as if someone else had taken over her body. The factory was becoming a physical manifestation of collapsed time, a place where geological eras bled together and visitors would be forced to experience the disorienting reality of extinction as an eternal moment rather than a historical event. Dr. Chen visited in June and stood speechless in the doorway. The space was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It wasn't art in any conventional sense. It was an environment that hurt to look at, that made your head spin trying to process the temporal impossibilities Elena had painted. "This is going to overwhelm people," he said quietly. "It might even frighten them. Are you sure you want to show this?" Elena turned to him with that distant look in her eyes. "People need to be overwhelmed. They need to feel what extinction actually is, not a linear story with a beginning and end, but a collapse of normal time where everything is dying and dead and alive simultaneously. That's the truth of it. That's what I experienced in Montana. And if I can make even one person feel that temporal collapse, maybe they'll understand why waiting doesn't make sense. You can't wait out an extinction because it's not happening in linear time. It's already finished and still ongoing and about to begin all at once." She added one final element that made the installation even more powerful. In each room, she installed speakers that played soundscapes she'd created, Not music, but audio that captured the feeling of each extinction. The Ordovician room had sounds of ice cracking and water freezing. The Devonian room had underwater suffocation sounds, creatures gasping for oxygen that wasn't there. The Permian room was volcanic roaring and atmospheric howling. The Triassic room was climate chaos, rapid temperature shifts creating wind patterns that screamed. The Cretaceous room had the asteroid impact sound, a noise so deep it was felt more than heard. And the Anthropocene room had something even more unsettling. Normal city sounds layered with silence, showing the present being slowly replaced by absence. The Museum of Collapsed Time opened in August with no official announcement. Elena just unlocked the doors one morning and posted a single message online. Open now. Come see how time ends. Free admission, no guides. Experience it yourself. Within hours, people started arriving. Word spread rapidly through social media. By the evening, over 100 people were waiting outside to enter. Elena had designed the experience to be solitary. Only 5 people could enter at a time, 1 per room, so you'd be alone with the collapsed timeline. You'd enter the Ordovician room alone and spend as long as you needed before moving to the next room. The isolation was crucial. She wanted people to confront extinction without the comfort of crowds or guides or explanations. The response was intense and varied. Some people spent hours in the museum, sitting in rooms and crying. Others fled after 10 minutes, unable to handle the temporal disorientation. Many people felt physically ill from the overlapping time periods, their brains struggling to process visual impossibilities. But almost everyone who made it through all 5 rooms emerged changed, unable to articulate exactly what they'd experienced, but knowing they'd witnessed something profound about time and death, and the patterns that connected them. Scientists started visiting, trying to understand what Elena had created. Some dismissed it as artistic exaggeration, but others, particularly those who studied extinction events, felt she'd captured something scientifically accurate about how these catastrophes actually unfolded. The compressed time, the simultaneous existence of life and death, the way endings and beginnings blurred together. Elena had found a way to show what the data indicated, but normal perception couldn't grasp. Climate psychologists were particularly interested. People who studied ecological grief and climate anxiety found that visitors who experienced the Museum of Collapsed Time often reported a shift in how they understood the current environmental crisis. It stopped being a future threat they were worried about and became a present reality they were already living through. The temporal collapse Elena had painted made it impossible to maintain the comfortable illusion that extinction was something happening to other species in other places at other times. The museum ran for 4 months and saw over 20,000 visitors, despite having no official publicity beyond word of mouth. People traveled from across the country to experience it. Researchers came to study visitor responses. Artists came to understand Elena's technique. Climate activists came to feel validated in their sense of urgency. And ordinary people came because they'd heard the museum would change how they saw time. And they were curious about what that meant. Dr. Chen visited regularly, watching Elena deteriorate physically while seeming to grow more centered mentally. She'd achieved what she set out to do. She'd created an environment where people could experience temporal collapse, where the illusion of linear time broke down, and the eternal now of extinction became visceral and undeniable. But the work had cost her everything. She'd sacrificed her health, her relationships, her normal cognitive function, all to show people a truth they couldn't access through conventional means.